The paper in my hand was worth $5 million. I stood in my driveway, staring at it for a full 10 seconds, making sure the numbers hadn't somehow rearranged themselves. They hadn't. 5 million. My heart was beating fast, but not in a panicked way. More like the moment before a storm breaks. After years of juggling bills, watching every dollar, and pretending everything was fine, that little lottery ticket meant the pressure was finally over. I grabbed my laptop bag and walked toward the front door of our house. I was 2 hours early. I wanted to see my wife's face when I told her. Rebecca had been working late all week, stressed about her quarterly numbers at the tech company where she ran a sales team. I imagined her relief when she realized we were suddenly free. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. I moved down the hallway toward her office and heard her voice through the slightly open door. She was on the phone, laughing. Not the polite laugh she used with clients, the real one. Then she said something that made my entire body go still. File the legal separation today. I want the timestamp before 5. My hand froze on the doorframe. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 34 years old. And for the past 3 years, I have been working as a freelance industrial product designer. Most of my work involved creating digital CAD models, tools, hardware parts, small mechanical gadgets that other designers and engineers could purchase and modify. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the groceries, the utilities, and sometimes a little extra. My wife, Rebecca Cole, liked to remind me of that difference constantly. Rebecca was 36 and worked as a director of sales for a SaaS tech company. She thrived in corporate environments, glass offices, quarterly targets, performance bonuses, networking dinners with venture capitalists, the kind of world where people measured value in titles and commission checks. In that world, my career barely registered. Rebecca didn't usually attack it directly in public. She was smarter than that. Instead, she wrapped the insults in jokes. At dinner parties, she'd say things like, "Daniel works from home designing little digital parts people print on 3D printers." Then she'd laugh and add, "It's basically his hobby that sometimes pays the grocery bill." Everyone would chuckle politely. I would too, because arguing about it never helped. The truth was my income fluctuated. Some months were good, some months were tight. Freelancing meant unpredictability. Rebecca's salary, on the other hand, was stable and impressive, 6 figures plus aggressive commission bonuses. And Rebecca loved that fact. Whenever the dishwasher broke or the car needed repairs, she'd sigh dramatically and say something like, "Good thing one of us has a real career." I never fought her on it. Not because I agreed with her, but because I believed something simpler. We were supposed to be a team. My work paid the smaller bills. Hers covered the bigger ones. Together, we managed the mortgage on our suburban house and kept things moving forward. Or at least that's what I believed. Looking back now, the signs were already there. Rebecca had become strangely secretive about her phone during the previous few months. She started taking calls in her office with the door closed. Sometimes she stayed out late after client dinners, coming home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. But I ignored those details. I told myself she was just stressed about work. Because when you trust someone, your brain does something dangerous. It edits reality to protect the relationship. And that Thursday afternoon, standing in the hallway outside Rebecca's office, while she calmly told a lawyer to file separation papers behind my back, was the exact moment that illusion shattered forever. The entire day had started in the most ordinary way possible. I had spent the morning finishing a batch of CAD files for a small manufacturing client in Ohio. They specialized in custom machining tools, and they had ordered a series of adjustable clamp designs that would be sold through their catalog. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. By early afternoon, my eyes were burning from staring at my monitor. I decided to take a break and run a few errands. The summer heat outside felt like opening an oven. I stopped at a gas station a few miles from the house to grab a bottle of water and a protein bar. The place was empty except for a tired cashier scrolling on his phone behind the counter. While I was paying, I noticed a row of scratch-off lottery tickets displayed near the register. Normally, I ignored them, but something about the moment, the heat, the exhaustion, the endless grind of worrying about bills made me hesitate. I pulled a $20 bill from my wallet. "Give me one of those," I said, pointing to a ticket in the middle row. The cashier slid it across the counter with the same bored expression he probably used for hundreds of customers a day. I took it out to my car. The interior of the car was scorching. The steering wheel was almost too hot to touch. I sat there with the air conditioner blasting, while I used a quarter from the cup holder to scratch away the silver coating. First number. Match. I paused. Second number. Match again. My breathing slowed. Then I revealed the prize amount. 500,000 yuan. For a moment I didn't react at all. My brain simply refused to accept what I was looking at. I rubbed the ticket with my thumb, half expecting the ink to smear or the numbers to shift into something more realistic. But they didn't. $5 million. Every financial pressure I had carried for years suddenly collapsed in my mind like a house of cards. The mortgage, the credit card balances, the quiet tension in our marriage whenever money came up. All of it could disappear overnight. I leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at the ticket while the air conditioner blasted against my face. I didn't laugh. I didn't shout. I just sat there quietly absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. Then one thought entered my mind. Rebecca. I imagined walking through the door, holding up the ticket, watching her expression change when she realized we didn't have to worry anymore. She could leave the corporate grind. We could travel, maybe buy a house somewhere quieter, maybe finally breathe. The idea of surprising her made my chest tighten with anticipation. I slipped the ticket carefully into the inside pocket of my jacket, started the car, and pulled out of the gas station parking lot. I drove straight home. The entire drive, I kept picturing Rebecca's reaction, the relief, the excitement, the way we'd probably laugh about all the stress we'd endured. I had no idea that while I was driving home with a $5 million secret, my wife was already on the phone with her lawyer, arranging the exact legal paperwork that would destroy our marriage before sunset. When I reached the house, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Rebecca's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home, but the place felt strangely still. No television, no music, just the quiet hum of the air conditioner, pushing cool air through the vents. I stepped inside and closed the door softly. My plan was simple. Walk into her office, surprise her, show her the ticket. Instead, as I moved down the hallway, I heard her voice through the slightly open door. She was on the phone. At first, I assumed it was a work call. Rebecca spent half her life negotiating contracts or talking to sales teams across different time zones, but her tone was different, relaxed, almost amused. Just file the legal separation papers today, she said. Yes, today? I want the timestamp recorded before 5 o'clock. My feet stopped moving. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until my chest started to tighten. I'm serious, Rebecca continued, her voice calm and controlled. The sooner it's filed, the better. There was a pause while the person on the other end of the line spoke. Then she laughed. Look, I'm not giving him a single dollar of my year-end commission bonus, she said. I've worked all year for that money. The words landed like a punch to the stomach. I leaned slowly against the wall in the hallway, staying completely silent. Rebecca kept talking. Daniel's little design business barely makes anything, she said dismissively. He sells those digital files online. It's basically a hobby that sometimes covers groceries. My jaw tightened. She sits at home drawing on a tablet, while I'm the one actually grinding in the real world, she added. Another pause. Then her voice dropped slightly, more conspiratorial. Once the separation date is officially recorded, my bonus is protected. Legally, it's mine. My brain started moving faster now, piecing together the implications. Legal separation, recorded date, protected assets. Rebecca wasn't just talking about divorce. She was strategically timing it. I'll tell him in a few days, she continued casually. First, I need him to sign a home equity loan. I'm pitching it as an investment opportunity. My hand clenched into a fist. He never reads financial paperwork anyway, Rebecca said with a laugh. He trusts me. My stomach twisted. Once the loan clears, I'll serve the separation papers. By the time he understands what happened, the house equity will already be liquid. She paused again, listening. Then she added the final piece of the plan. He'll probably have to move out, but he'll survive. There was a sharp and humorless edge in her voice when she said the next sentence. He's always been more dependent on me than he likes to admit. The call ended a few seconds later. I stayed where I was, staring at the wall while my mind replayed everything I had just heard. Rebecca wasn't stressed about work. She wasn't distracted. She had been quietly planning this for months. The late-night calls, the secretive messages, the sudden focus on financial documents, all of it suddenly made sense. She wasn't protecting our future. She was preparing to destroy mine. Slowly, I reached inside my jacket pocket and touched the corner of the lottery ticket. $5 million. Just hours ago, I had been rushing home excited to share the news with her. Now that same piece of paper felt like something completely different, not a celebration, a weapon, and Rebecca had just made the biggest mistake of her life without realizing it. Because while she was busy arranging the legal separation to protect her money, she had no idea the most valuable asset either of us would ever possess was already sitting in my pocket. For a few seconds after Rebecca ended the call, I didn't move. I just stood there in the hallway, staring at the floor while everything I'd heard replayed in my head. Legal separation. Filed today. Timestamp recorded before 5. She had repeated that part twice. At first, it just sounded like corporate paranoia. Rebecca was always obsessed with timing deadlines, quarterly reports, like commission cycles. But the longer I stood there, the more the legal implications started forming in my mind. Rebecca wasn't doing this randomly. She was protecting something, her year-end bonus. Then a memory surfaced. A conversation we had months ago with a real estate attorney when we refinanced the house. He had casually explained how property division worked in our state if a couple separated. One specific sentence came back to me with terrifying clarity. Once the legal date of separation is recorded, the marital financial community ends immediately, meaning anything earned after that moment belongs solely to the person who earned it. Salary, bonuses, assets, even debts. My heartbeat slowed. I replayed the timeline of my day. Rebecca said she filed the paperwork this morning. I had stopped at the gas station around 2 in the afternoon. Slowly, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the lottery ticket. The thin paper felt suddenly much heavier in my hand. $5 million. If Rebecca's lawyer had already submitted the separation filing earlier today, then legally, our shared finances had already been split before I bought this ticket. Which meant something incredible. This wasn't marital property. It wasn't shared. It wasn't something Rebecca could fight for in court. Legally speaking, that $5 million belonged to one person only. Rebecca had rushed to file the separation papers because she was afraid I might take part of her bonus. In doing so, she had accidentally built a legal wall around the biggest financial event of our lives, and she had placed herself on the wrong side of it. I stared at the ticket in my hand. A slow, cold understanding settled in. Just an hour earlier, I had planned to run into her office, wrap my arms around her, and celebrate our sudden fortune together. Now the idea felt almost absurd. The woman I had been married to for 7 years had just finished explaining to her lawyer how she planned to drain the equity from our house and throw me out. She thought she was the only one playing a financial game. She had no idea. She had just handed me the winning move. Upstairs, I heard Rebecca's office chair scrape against the floor. She was getting up. I slipped the lottery ticket back into my jacket pocket. By the time she walked out of that office, my face looked completely normal. Confused. Just another husband arriving home early. Inside, though, everything had changed. Because Rebecca believed she had already set the trap. What she didn't realize was that the trap had already closed, and the only person caught inside it was her. The office door opened. Rebecca stepped into the hallway with her phone still in her hand. She stopped when she saw me standing there. For half a second, genuine panic flashed across her face. Then it vanished. Her expression shifted instantly into the polished, confident version of herself she used with clients. "Daniel," she said, exhaling as if I had startled her. "You scared me. When did you get home?" "Just now," I replied evenly. She studied my face, searching for something, any sign that I had overheard the conversation. I kept my expression neutral. Rebecca relaxed. "Sorry," she said casually, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Nightmare client call. One of my accounts is trying to back out of a contract." She walked past me toward the kitchen as if nothing unusual had happened. Perfect timing. "Though," she added over her shoulder, "I'm making dinner tonight." Dinner. The normalcy of the word felt surreal. Just minutes earlier, I had heard her calmly planning how to dismantle my life. Now she was acting like nothing had changed. I followed her into the kitchen, keeping my hands in my jacket pockets so she wouldn't see them shaking slightly. "Finished work early?" she asked while opening the refrigerator. "Yeah," I said. Wrapped up a project faster than expected. That part wasn't even a lie. While she prepared food, I leaned casually against the counter and watched her move around the kitchen. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at my wife. I was studying an opponent. Every gesture, every word, every small inconsistency. Rebecca cooked salmon and garlic butter, pouring 2 glasses of expensive red wine like it was a quiet Friday evening instead of the beginning of a financial war. 30 minutes later, we were sitting at the dining table. She smiled. asked about my design projects, even complimented one of my recent clients. It was almost convincing. Then she set down her fork and reached for a thick stack of papers on the kitchen island. Here it is, I thought. Rebecca slid the documents across the table toward me. I need a small favor, she said lightly. I glanced at the paperwork. Bank forms, loan disclosures, legal language. A couple guys at work are launching a startup. Rebecca continued. It's a guaranteed investment opportunity, but I need access to liquidity quickly. She tapped the top page. I set up a home equity line of credit. Just sign the highlighted tabs, and we can process it tomorrow. I picked up the packet. My eyes moved slowly across the pages. Variable interest rate. Yen. Zero credit line. Funds deposited into an account under Rebecca Cole's name only. Exactly like she had described on the phone. She shifted in her chair when I kept reading. You don't have to go through the whole thing, she said. It's standard paperwork. I looked up at her. Why would we put the house up as collateral? I asked calmly. For money that goes into an account only you control. Her smile vanished. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, irritation creeping into her voice. Because I'm the one making the investment, Daniel. She folded her arms. I understand high-level finance. You design digital parts for hobbyists online. There it was. The same condescending tone she used whenever she wanted to remind me of my place. I'm trying to secure our future, she continued sharply. And instead of supporting me, you're interrogating me? I held her gaze. Inside my jacket pocket, the lottery ticket pressed against my chest. Rebecca thought she was manipulating me into signing away the last piece of financial security I had. She had no idea the game had already changed. And for the first time since our marriage began, I was the one holding the winning hand. Rebecca pushed her chair back from the table with a sharp scrape against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous, she said, tossing her cloth napkin onto her plate. I work 50 hours a week to keep this household running. And the one time I ask for support, you turn into a financial auditor. She stood up. I'm taking a shower. Have the paperwork signed by the time I get back. Her footsteps echoed up the staircase. A few seconds later, the bathroom door slammed. Water started running. I sat alone at the table, staring at the loan documents. The house. The same house where my father's life insurance money had paid the entire down payment. Rebecca was trying to pull $80,000 of equity out of it, just hours before serving me with separation papers. If I had signed those documents tonight, the debt would legally follow me even after she kicked me out. It was a clean financial execution. I stood slowly and carried the plates to the sink. As I walked past the kitchen island, Rebecca's tablet lit up with a notification. A new email preview flashed across the screen. Rebecca's attorney. I hesitated, then tapped the screen. The message was short, brutally clear. Rebecca. Confirmation received. The legal separation filing has been officially recorded by the county clerk at 9:00 a.m. today. Your commission bonus and future earnings are now protected from Daniel. Once you secure his signature on the equity loan, we can proceed with eviction paperwork. Eviction. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Rebecca wasn't just divorcing me. She was trying to strip everything first, then throw me out. Upstairs, the shower turned off. I quickly locked the tablet and stepped away. Seconds later, the house filled with another sound. Headlights swept across the living room windows. A vehicle pulling into the driveway. Gravel crunching. I frowned. Rebecca hadn't mentioned anyone coming over. Then I heard loud laughter outside. A voice I recognized instantly. Rebecca's mother. The front door opened without knocking. Rebecca, we're here, a sharp voice announced. Margaret Cole stepped inside first, wearing oversized designer sunglasses, even though the sun was already setting. Behind her came Rebecca's younger sister Lauren, typing aggressively on her phone. And right behind them, a tall man in a tailored navy suit carrying a leather portfolio. Victor Hale, Lauren's husband, a real estate broker. None of them even acknowledged me at first. Victor walked straight into the living room, scanning the walls like he was evaluating a property listing. Rebecca came down the stairs a moment later, hair still damp from the shower. She smiled, not surprised, not confused, satisfied. They had planned this. Victor wanted to take a look at the property. Rebecca said casually. Victor paced across the hardwood floor, hands behind his back. I'm telling you right now, he said to Rebecca, ignoring me completely. This neighborhood is starting to dip. You should sell before the market shifts. He pulled a metal measuring tape from his pocket. The loud metallic snap echoed through the room. Victor hooked the end against the baseboard and began dragging it across the living room. If we remove this load-bearing wall, he muttered, we can open the floor plan and stage the house properly. Margaret ran her finger along my coffee table like an inspector checking for dust. Well, she said coldly, glancing at me. Rebecca deserves a house that reflects her professional status. Lauren looked up from her phone and smirked. How's the little online design shop going? Daniel, she asked, still selling digital files to hobbyists. Victor finished measuring and scribbled something in his notebook. 2 weeks, he said confidently. I can have a renovation crew in here, and this place listed immediately. I stared at them. They weren't talking about a hypothetical sale. They were planning it like I already didn't live here. Margaret finally turned to face me fully. You should start packing your things, she said bluntly. Rebecca folded her arms and leaned against the kitchen counter. No guilt, no hesitation. The entire room was filled with people who believed I had already lost. They thought they were witnessing the final step of my financial collapse. What none of them knew was that the quiet man standing in the middle of that living room was already holding a $5 million secret. And every single one of them had just walked straight into the battlefield. The atmosphere in the living room had turned thick. Victor was still scribbling measurements into his notebook like he was already preparing the real estate listing. Margaret stood beside the fireplace, inspecting the room with open disdain, while Lauren leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone. Rebecca watched the entire scene quietly, satisfied. They were waiting for me to break. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the front doorbell rang, a short and sharp chime that echoed through the house. Margaret frowned. Are you expecting someone else? Rebecca glanced toward the door, then back at me. A strange smile crossed her face. Yes, she said calmly. Actually, I am. She walked to the front door and opened it. Standing on the porch was a man in his late 20s, athletic, dressed in expensive casual clothes. He was holding the handle of a large rolling suitcase, but the first thing anyone noticed wasn't the suitcase. It was the woman standing behind him. Rebecca reached out and took the suitcase from his hand like she had done it 100 times before. Everyone, she said casually, stepping aside so they could enter. This is Tyler. The man walked into the house confidently, barely glancing at me. Then the woman followed him. Her hand rested protectively on a visibly pregnant stomach. The room went completely silent. My eyes moved from the suitcase to the pregnancy, to Rebecca. Rebecca folded her arms. This seemed like the right time to stop pretending, she said. Margaret hurried forward immediately, her entire demeanor changing. Oh, sweetheart, she said warmly to the pregnant woman. You must be exhausted. Lauren rushed to help her take off her coat. Come sit down, she said excitedly. You shouldn't be standing. I stood there watching the scene unfold like I had stepped into someone else's life. Rebecca looked at me with absolute indifference. Tyler will be staying here from now on, she said. Her tone was flat, practical, like she was discussing furniture placement. And since the separation paperwork is already filed, she continued, it makes sense to start preparing the house for the baby. My mind registered the words one piece at a time. House. Staying here. Rebecca rested her hand lightly on Tyler's shoulder. He's the father, she said. The entire room watched me, waiting for the explosion, the shouting, the anger, but none of that came, because inside my jacket pocket, the lottery ticket pressed quietly against my chest. Rebecca thought she had just destroyed my life. What she didn't understand yet was that every cruel move she made tonight was only tightening the trap she had built for herself. And the war between us had only just begun. No one in that living room understood the most important thing about that moment. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. The shock had already happened in the hallway earlier that afternoon when I heard Rebecca planning the divorce over the phone. Everything after that, the loan documents, her family measuring the house, the mistress standing in my living room, was just confirmation. So instead of shouting, I nodded once. Then I said the only thing that made sense. Congratulations. Rebecca blinked, clearly thrown off. Margaret frowned like she'd expected something far more dramatic. Lauren actually looked disappointed. Tyler smirked. None of them realized that calm wasn't weakness. It was distance. I grabbed my laptop bag from the kitchen chair. Where are you going? Rebecca asked. Her tone carried a hint of suspicion now. Out, I said simply. She crossed her arms. You can't just leave in the middle of this conversation. I looked at her for a moment. What conversation? Rebecca's expression hardened. This is still my house too, she snapped. The words almost made me laugh, but I kept my face neutral. Not for long, she added coldly. That was the last thing she said to me before I walked out the front door. The night air outside was cool. I sat in my car for a few minutes, with both hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield while the lights of the house glowed behind me. 7 years of marriage. And Rebecca had dismantled it in a single afternoon. Not emotionally, financially, methodically. Which meant my response couldn't be emotional either. It had to be strategic. I started the engine and drove straight downtown. There was only one person I needed to talk to. A lawyer. Not just any lawyer. The best one I could find. An hour later, I was sitting in the quiet office of Caroline Hayes, a divorce attorney whose name came up repeatedly whenever high-asset separations appeared in local news. Her office walls were lined with framed court victories. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The separation filing. The home equity loan attempt. The mistress moving into the house. When I finally placed the lottery ticket on her desk, she leaned forward slightly. You're certain this was purchased after the legal separation filing, she asked. 2 in the afternoon, I said. Her lawyer confirmed the filing was recorded at 9 this morning. Caroline studied the ticket for several seconds. Then she leaned back in her chair. Well, she said calmly, that changes everything. I waited. She folded her hands on the desk. Legally speaking, Mr. Mercer, that lottery ticket is separate property. Your wife has absolutely no claim to it. The tension in my chest loosened slightly. But if she discovers it, Caroline continued, she'll still try to fight for it. And litigation can get ugly. So what do? I asked. Caroline smiled faintly. First, she said, sliding the ticket back toward me. You say nothing. Second, we protect the asset before anyone else knows it exists. She opened a folder and began writing notes. Tomorrow morning, we'll create a blind trust under a holding entity. The winnings will be deposited there, completely separate from your personal accounts. She looked up again. By the time your wife realizes what's happened, the money will already be untouchable. For the first time that day, I felt something close to control returning. Rebecca believed she was the only one planning ahead. She believed she had already won. But tonight had just changed the entire battlefield. And Caroline Hayes was about to help me turn Rebecca's perfect little financial trap into the worst mistake of her life. The next morning, the war officially began. Caroline moved fast. Before noon, we had already filed the paperwork for a blind trust, opened through a holding entity that had no obvious connection to my personal name. The lottery ticket would be processed through that structure the moment the claim was approved. The $5 million was already disappearing into legal layers. Rebecca would never see coming. But Caroline wasn't finished. Financial betrayal rarely happens in isolation, she said, while reviewing my notes. People who manipulate money usually leave a trail. She leaned forward. Did your wife ever hide financial accounts from you? I thought about it for a moment. Then I remembered something. Rebecca had always been strangely protective of one particular external hard drive. It sat on the shelf beside her office desk, plugged into her laptop most evenings. Whenever I entered the room unexpectedly, she would close whatever she was working on. At the time, I assumed it was work material. Now I wasn't so sure. That afternoon, while Rebecca was at the office, I returned to the house to gather a few personal belongings. No one else was there. Tyler's suitcase was still sitting in the guest bedroom. Rebecca's mother's perfume lingered faintly in the living room. The house already felt different, like I had become a visitor in my own life. I walked into Rebecca's office. The hard drive was still there. Small, black, completely ordinary. I hesitated for a moment. Then I unplugged it. Back in my car, I connected the drive to my laptop. The folder structure opened immediately. No password. Rebecca had always believed I wasn't curious enough to look. The first few directories contained exactly what I expected: sales reports, commission spreadsheets, marketing projections. But deeper in the drive, a folder caught my attention. Private. Inside were dozens of financial statements, credit card bills, bank transfers, expense summaries. I opened one, then another, then another. My stomach slowly tightened. Over the past 12 months, Rebecca had spent more than $60,000 on a single credit card. None of it had gone toward our household. The charges were painfully obvious. Luxury hotel suites, high-end restaurants, designer boutiques, prenatal medical clinics, and dozens of payments labeled simply, Tyler G. I leaned back in the driver's seat. This wasn't just an affair. Rebecca had been financing an entire second life. Then I opened the final folder. And that's when the situation became much worse. International wire transfers. Small amounts at first. 4,000美元, 7,500美元, yuan 2,000美元, each one sent to accounts in the Cayman Islands. No corporate explanation. No tax reporting forms. Just private transfers hidden from her company records. I took screenshots of everything, then copied the entire drive. That evening, I returned to Caroline's office and placed the duplicate files on her desk. She reviewed the documents quietly for several minutes. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me. "Well," she said slowly, "your wife has just handed us 3 very powerful legal arguments." I waited. Caroline raised one finger. First, marital waste. She spent tens of thousands of dollars on her affair partner. A second finger. Second, financial concealment. Then a third. And third, possible tax fraud if those offshore transfers weren't reported. She closed the folder. "Mercer," she said calmly, "if this goes to court, your wife isn't walking in with the upper hand." She leaned back slightly. "She's walking in carrying a legal bomb. And soon enough, we were going to light the fuse." 3 weeks later, we sat across from each other in a quiet mediation room on the 12th floor of a downtown law office. Rebecca arrived first. She walked in wearing the same sharp corporate confidence she used in boardrooms' navy blazer. Perfect posture. Expression calm and superior. Tyler wasn't there, but her mother Margaret was. Of course, she was. Margaret sat behind Rebecca like a silent bodyguard, arms folded, scanning the room with the same cold judgment she had shown the night they walked into my house. Rebecca glanced at me briefly when I entered with Caroline. Her eyes flicked down my suit, assessing, probably disappointed that I didn't look like a man whose life had collapsed. Caroline set her briefcase on the table. Rebecca's attorney, a gray-haired man named Stephen Adler. This began the meeting. "Let's keep this civil and efficient," he said, folding his hands together. "Cole is willing to settle quickly." Rebecca nodded. Stephen slid a folder across the table toward me. "The proposed agreement is straightforward," he continued. I opened the document. Rebecca would keep the house, her salary, her bonuses, her retirement accounts, her investment portfolio. In exchange, I would receive a modest cash settlement, barely enough to rent an apartment for a year. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, watching my reaction carefully. She expected anger, maybe desperation. Instead, I closed the folder calmly and pushed it back across the table. "No," I said. Stephen sighed as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Mercer, this offer is extremely generous given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Caroline asked evenly. Stephen glanced at her. "Your client has very limited financial contributions to the marriage." Rebecca's lips curved slightly. There it was again. The narrative she had been building for years. Daniel the dependent husband. Daniel the hobbyist. Daniel the financial burden. Caroline opened her briefcase. "Well," she said calmly, "let's talk about contributions." She slid a thick folder onto the table. Stephen frowned slightly. "What's this?" Caroline flipped the folder open. "Exhibit A," she said. Rebecca leaned forward. Her expression changed almost immediately. Caroline slid several printed statements across the table. Credit card bills, highlighted. Hotel receipts, restaurant invoices, jewelry purchases. Tyler's name appeared repeatedly. Stephen picked up the first page. His eyebrows lifted. Caroline continued speaking. "Over the past 12 months, Mrs. Cole spent approximately $63,412 in marital funds on her extramarital partner." Margaret inhaled sharply. Rebecca's face went pale. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "Those are personal expenses." Caroline shook her head. "Not according to the law. When marital funds are used to finance an affair, it's classified as marital waste." Stephen looked down at the documents again. Caroline placed another stack of papers on the table. Exhibit B. Wire transfer records. Offshore banking receipts. Stephen's expression tightened. "These transfers," Caroline said calmly, "appear to be routed through Cayman-based accounts not listed on Mrs. Cole's financial disclosure forms." Rebecca's voice sharpened. "That's confidential business activity." Caroline smiled faintly. "Then I'm sure the IRS will enjoy hearing that explanation." The room went silent. Margaret looked at Rebecca, suddenly unsure. Stephen leaned toward his client. "Rebecca," he whispered urgently, "you didn't disclose offshore accounts to me." Rebecca stared at the documents in front of her. Her confidence was evaporating. Caroline closed the folder slowly. We haven't even discussed the potential tax implications yet, she added calmly. Stephen rubbed his forehead. This changes the entire settlement discussion. Rebecca looked up at me for the first time since the meeting started. Her eyes were no longer confident. They were searching, trying to understand how the man she thought she had cornered had suddenly turned the entire legal battlefield upside down. Caroline leaned back in her chair. Given the evidence of marital waste and possible financial misconduct, she said evenly, my client will not be accepting your proposed settlement. Stephen sighed heavily. Rebecca's perfect plan was collapsing in real time, and we weren't even close to revealing the most devastating piece of information yet, because sitting quietly behind all those legal arguments was a $5 million secret Rebecca still didn't know existed. And when that final card hit the table, everything she thought she was fighting for would vanish instantly. The room had gone completely silent. Stephen Adler was still flipping through the financial documents Caroline had placed on the table. Margaret sat rigid in her chair, her face tight with worry. Rebecca stared down at the evidence in front of her, like she was trying to will it to disappear. For the first time since the meeting began, the power dynamic had shifted, but we weren't finished. Stephen finally cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, he said cautiously, it may be best for both parties to reach a revised financial agreement. Rebecca leaned forward sharply. No, she said. Her voice carried the stubborn confidence of someone who still believed she could control the outcome. Daniel has no assets, she continued. Even if you argue marital waste, it barely changes the division. She turned toward me with a cold smile. You still walk away with almost nothing. Caroline didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened another folder in her briefcase. Rebecca noticed the movement. What now? She said impatiently. Caroline slid a single document across the table. It wasn't thick like the other evidence packets. Just one printed page. Rebecca picked it up. At first, her expression showed confusion, then disbelief. Her eyes scanned the numbers again and again. What is this? She asked quietly. Caroline folded her hands. That, she said calmly, is the certified deposit record of a $3. 2 million lottery payout currently held in trust under Mr. Mercer's legal ownership. Margaret gasped. Stephen's head snapped up. Rebecca's face went white. You're lying, she said immediately. Caroline shook her head. She slid another document across the table. The official lottery commission verification. Rebecca's hands began to tremble slightly as she read it. This happened during the marriage, she said quickly, her voice rising. Half of that belongs to me. For the first time in the entire meeting, I spoke. No, I said quietly. Everyone turned toward me. Caroline leaned back in her chair. Cole, she said evenly. You filed for legal separation at 9:00 a.m. on the morning of May 14th. She tapped the paperwork. Mercer purchased the winning lottery ticket at 2:07 p.m. that same afternoon. Stephen's eyes widened. He immediately understood. Caroline continued. Under state law, the legal financial partnership of the marriage ended the moment your separation filing was recorded. She gestured toward the document, which means the lottery winnings are separate property belonging exclusively to Mr. Mercer. The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca stared at the paper like it was written in another language. No, she whispered. Margaret looked from the document to Rebecca in disbelief. Stephen slowly leaned back in his chair. There's no legal path to claim those funds, he said quietly. Rebecca's composure shattered. You knew, she said, looking at me with wide eyes. You knew this whole time. I met her gaze calmly. The truth was simple. She had spent months designing a financial trap to destroy me, and in her rush to protect her bonus, she had accidentally sealed herself out of the most valuable asset either of us would ever see. Rebecca's voice cracked. That money should have been ours. I stood up from the table. No, I said. Then I gave the only explanation she would ever get. You made sure it wasn't. 6 months later, the entire situation looked very different. Rebecca's life unraveled quickly once the legal dust settled. The IRS investigation Caroline had warned about turned out to be very real. The offshore transfers Rebecca had hidden through those Cayman accounts triggered a full audit of her finances. Her company placed her on administrative leave during the investigation. 3 months later, she was terminated. Officially, it was labeled as financial misconduct. Unofficially, no major tech firm wanted a sales director connected to possible tax fraud and a public divorce scandal. The house she had tried so hard to keep didn't last either. Without her commission income, and with mounting legal fees, the The mortgage quickly became impossible to maintain. Victor's optimistic real estate predictions disappeared overnight when the market shifted. Ironically, the house eventually sold for less than what we originally paid for it. Margaret stopped calling. Lauren deleted most of her social media accounts after the divorce filings became public record. As for Tyler, the last thing I heard was that he moved to another state shortly before the baby was born. Apparently, even he didn't want to stay around once the financial stability Rebecca had promised disappeared. I never spoke to Rebecca again. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. My life moved in a very different direction. The lottery money, after taxes, left me with a little over $3 million, placed safely inside the trust Caroline helped establish. I didn't buy anything extravagant. No sports cars. No luxury penthouses. Instead, I purchased a modest house along the Oregon coast. A quiet place overlooking the Pacific, where the only sounds most mornings are waves hitting the rocks and seabirds circling above the water. My design work continued. But now I chose projects because they interested me, not because I needed to survive. Looking back, I sometimes think about how differently things might have ended if Rebecca had simply been honest. But life rarely collapses because of one moment. It collapses because of hundreds of small decisions made in the dark, each one pushing the truth a little further away. Rebecca thought she was setting the perfect trap. In the end, she did. She just didn't realize she was building it around herself. This story was created by the Boundaries and Bloodlines team for entertainment purposes only. It is a fictional narrative and should not be interpreted as legal, financial, or personal advice. Please do not attempt to replicate any actions described in this story.